Hello everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the Mobula 6 HD0 version, which is called the Eco, and the VTX and camera, which is also called the Eco. Of course, we're going to have an inside flight with the suggested camera settings. We're going to have an outside sample flight with the suggested camera settings. The full outside flight will have the default camera settings. We'll also take a look at what it looks like when you don't update the firmware on the VTX and camera combo. And we'll do a little LED flying as well. So there's a lot to get to, so let's get started. Just like with the analog version of the Mobula 6 2024 edition, we have SE0702 28,000 kV motors. And on those motors are the Gemfan 1208 tri-bladed 31mm props. The flight controller is the Super X HD, and it does come with Express LRS, as well as motor connectors, which we didn't have on the analog version. The previously mentioned HD0 Eco system, which is their VTX and camera combination, and you'll notice no more MIPI cable. I don't know how they did that, but we just have a 4-wire setup for this HD0 camera. Battery connection is the A30, which is BT20 compatible, as we see here. The Mob 6 Eco weighs 23.5 grams. I fly and recommend the Weebleed FPV as well as TinyWhoop.com 1S batteries. And with one of those batteries, our all-up flying weight comes in at almost 32 grams. The HD0 Eco weighs 6.76 grams with the stock antenna that it comes with. The Mobula 6 did not come with the same antenna. It came with what we see is more traditional. And because we love it, motor post to motor post, it comes in at 65 millimeters. The HD0 Eco does come with the lead and connector that you need to connect up to your flight controller, as well as mounting grommets. The Mobula 6 Eco does come with your traditional assortments. Note that they have longer mounting screws, which is a smart move, although I did recommend that they use larger headed long screws for mounting this canopy down. We also get a small screwdriver, an extra set of props. We get some motor mounting screws, as well as the obligatory prop remover that really doesn't prop remove. And we also get 3 sheets of stickers. So before we start the inside flight, I do want to show you the camera settings because I found that they do make a dramatic difference. Outside of the firmware, because I originally started flying this on whatever firmware they shipped it on, and then I flew it for about 10 days, and then HD0 came back and said, hey, we have a firmware update, so I slapped that on there, and we'll get to all that. But these were the settings that they sent, and I think Carl from HD0 knows that I don't like to change the settings when it comes to reviews. But in this case, I thought it came before my review anyways, and I thought I could show it as well as show it in the default view that you would get with the firmware version that at this time it is running. Of course, with HD0 or with HD systems, the firmware is kind of always maturing and it's always changing, and whether that affects our camera or our video signal performance, you know, that's kind of what the firmware changes are built around or designed for. But these are the settings that they sent. Don't worry if you're not capturing this on screen. I will go ahead and put it on screen after we get done with all the flying, so you can just see the type text of the settings, and you can write those down or capture those or whatever method you like to capture those on. Hopefully, future firmware versions will just come with those camera settings. And this is our inside flight. I'm going to take off here just momentarily. There we go. So this is going to be my traditional flight style. I shouldn't presume, but you know, my flight style inside is kind of a racing flight style. It's kind of where I started at, and it's kind of where FPV and my joy for FPV came, was kind of flying low and fast and kind of that pod racer sort of flight feel. So the audio does not come from the VTX. I get that question a lot. I think that's a question of innocence. Many of our veterans know. I use a secondary camera. It's actually a cell phone. And then I bring that audio from the cell phone into the flight footage. So this was one of my most recent flights because it does have the new camera settings. Also, something to note about video reception is, you know, our houses here in the U.S. are built with traditional cardboard. That's a joke. It's not cardboard. It's sheetrock and wood for the most part. Industrially, you will find some aluminum studs as well as different wall boards. But, you know, for residential sort of construction, this is what we have. And our floor plan sets out pretty well for video reception. So if you are flying in an apartment that has concrete walls and you have a lot of RF floating around from various neighbors and stuff, your video reception might not be as good. Of course, I always recommend flying R8, which I am in this particular video, because R8 gets us up above Wi-Fi frequency, and that is the best possible solution, at least while you're flying alone. So do know that my position also matters. If I fly sitting in the basement, my reception on the main floor is not nearly as good. So this position is also important to the video reception. Now, I haven't even talked about the quad, and I'm almost 2 minutes into this. So I like my batteries to also end at 3.5 volts after I come back to my landing spot and disarm, and kind of give them a moment to their voltage to increase. And right there at the end of the flight, I ran in, softly I would note, ran in to the chair, and we've ended the flight now on the table where I am sitting. 2:04 on the flight time, and that is pretty traditional for me to get somewhere between. Some of my faster flights were at like 155, and then other flights were at like 210 to 215. So this is a sample. I wanted to show you this first before we go to the outside flight, the full flight that I'm going to show you. Of course, you can look at this and take away from it what you will, but this is with those camera settings, because the flight that we're going to go to, which was the designated outside flight for me, I didn't have these settings yet. So I was flying it on the stock setting. So you'll get to see the difference. Just know that this section of flight that I'm kind of narrating through is so that you can see what it looks like with the camera settings that are suggested from HD0. And I do think those camera settings do make quite a bit of difference, because the stock settings, the main thing I noticed was like the skin tones and the wood really had an orange sort of flavor to them. So the setting changes that they have took that away, and it actually make the image appear much more natural than it did on the stock or default settings that I received with the firmware update that I am running. And here is the outside flight that I was speaking of. This is on the default settings. You can tell that the blues in the sky are a much different shade. You probably also notice just various other colorations just aren't quite as good. I think the picture is about as clear, but I shouldn't talk too much about the clarity of the image because I am not all that discerning. Of course, the sun is lower during this flight. This, I believe, is an after-work flight before I start running kids around to the various places they go in the evenings. And I do outside flights on these for a lot of different reasons, because whoops aren't just for inside flying. Some people like to fly whoops in small playgrounds, which are really fun to go through the tubes on those playgrounds. When my kids were younger and they used to be in those playgrounds, I used to do that. I didn't feature it much on the channel, but it was something that I enjoyed, was flying around those jungle gym sort of tubey sort of playground sets that they have. Or you just have a smaller space maybe between your house and the neighbor's house. They're also very, very small, so they're not very alarming to any folks who might get concerned about quads or drones flying in their area. You show them something like this and they're kind of like, oh, well, that thing's tiny. Excuse the noise. I do have kids at home as spring break has started. But I think for 1S, it's very viable outside. You can do just about everything I normally would do. You just do it on a smaller scale. And that shouldn't be surprising because we're flying on a smaller scale, right? They can be most fun in shooting particular gaps. I have to be careful when I'm around the pool because you'll notice some water on the pool cover. So if I bonk into something and I crash out there, there's some probability that I might not make it out of there. Oh yeah, and I had a crash right there too. That was a little bit of danger there. Also, when I'm over in that cabana, that outdoor living space area, I am flying behind myself. So I really don't have any antennas helping us out there. So if you see some of that breakup, yeah, I'm flying behind myself and I'm not even facing that direction at all. So that's not very beneficial. It would be most beneficial if I turned myself probably about another 25 to 30 degrees to my right. That would kind of cover the area a little bit better. But the flight has ended. Outside, we got 2 minutes and 10 seconds because we have longer runs, less tighter turns, and our battery's in good shape at 353. Probably could have flown another second or two. And of course, this is our LED run. This is for all our racer friends or people that like to go to Whoop events. Whoop events are notoriously fun. I think I actually said notoriously fun in the last video when I talked about Whoops, but I have various gates out. Mobili Gates, I don't believe is operating anymore, even though their website is up. It doesn't appear as though you can order. Weebleed FPV, which is the two cube gates. You've got the flexible cube gate and the PVC, the multicolored one up there. Those are available, as well as there's another Weebleed gate, just a single hoop gate sitting down there on the floor. Of course, Tiny Whoop sells gates. Newbie Drone sells gates. You can get lots of gates at various places. Gates tend to be a little bit of an expense. I can't remember the pricing on it, but I do know those cube gates, especially the PVC one, is fairly expensive. And they do have two different sizes. I've got the big cube gate sitting on the table back there, so you might want a smaller one, because that one I have to break down in order to put it away and get it through a doorway back there. But this is also on the old camera settings. I didn't have an opportunity to recharge batteries and get everything set back up for the new camera settings. So that's something else I need to make sure I make a strong point of when it comes to this LED flying, is this was with the default settings, which I suspect this would all be improved. And if needed, please let me know. I can come back maybe in another week. I'll get another opportunity to charge batteries and whatnot and get the gates set back up and do another flight with the updated camera settings. More than willing to do that, but if it's not really necessary, no reason to fill up your YouTube subscriptions with another video that only a couple of people are interested in. The Mob 6 Eco should debut at $150, which some of you might be surprised at that price point. I know I was. And the Eco VTX HD0, that should be debuting at $70. So if you're an HD0 user, to me, especially being a micro guy, this seems like a no-brainer. Unless there's something in the other HD0 cameras that you're looking for. Mounting is one thing for the camera. It's only got those two screw holes at the front. So mounting the camera is something where you're going to have to keep that camera in mind. But for $70, and I have beat this up, and I have a crash reel for you as well. I have flown this. Well, I got this at the same time that I got the Mobula 6 2024, the analog version. And so I've been kind of flying them side by side for the most part over the course of the last 2+ weeks. It might be 16 or 17 days. And I can always fly inside over lunch and in the evenings and stuff like that. So I've got a lot of flights on this already. And when we get down to the desk, I will show you the crash reel that I have, which I think in many regards is that durability test that most people want to see with new products. But before we get to the crash reel and some desk details, I do think it's important to show you how this shipped to me. Now, originally when this came to me, I'm kind of being redundant there with my words, I guess. I'm sorry about that. It came with a widescreen format, which some people might ask, hey, I want to fly that format. Can I go back to that with the new firmware? No, that does not appear to be an option right now. Hopefully we will see that option if the community calls for it. I know a lot of people fly Tiny Whoops in 4.3 basically because it's probably the most comfortable for most people. But if you want the widescreen format, the best thing you can do is either send a message to HD0 or leave a comment down in the comment section letting HD0 know that you want the widescreen format back. Of course, at this time, this is running on the default settings as it came out of the box as well. So there probably is some enhancement we can make to this image, either be the color and saturation and brightness settings to make it more like the 4.3 version that I showed you after the camera changes. But just know that this is how the camera comes out of the box. So if you're wondering why, if you buy the Eco VTX and camera, and then you wonder why yours looks differently than mine, it's because you need to put firmware on it. Which, if you don't have one of these VTX programmers from HD0, yeah, this makes things so much easier, and it's so much quicker. You don't have to worry about heating up your board because you've got it plugged in too long or anything. I highly recommend for our HD0 users that you have one of these VTX programmers. It cleans up the process and makes it so much easier. I'll put the crash reel over here. It's about 3 minutes of crashes. Just know that that's not all of my crashes. There's none of the widescreen flight footage in the crashing. I just went over my last, I think it was 2 or 3 days of flights and pulled out the different crashes that I had. Many of them at the beginning of the section were where I was trying that move from the top floor of our house down through the stairwell. And I just couldn't get it. There's something about my technique or just my skill set. I just wasn't getting it. I pulled it off before a time or two, but honestly, it hasn't been something that I practice all that much. But with this particular case, and I had pretty much completed my flying as far as my satisfactory number of flights, which is got to be close to 80 or 100 at this point on the Eco. I did two things at that point. I did my speed run, which was the teaser clip at the very beginning, that little short burst. It was 25, 30 seconds, whatever. I do that in order to just kind of push myself because it's something I enjoy. I enjoy trying to fly a little faster, as well as, when you have crashes, when you're trying to fly a little faster, does have to prove out the durability to a certain extent. So the crashes, as well as the crash reel, as well as my little pushing the speed sort of speed runs are all part of the process normally for me. And as you can tell, our pitch on our props might be a little bit bodged up or something like that, but I don't think it's too bad. I even think, even with the props being as high as they are, I still think the motor stems are in good shape. Again, just like with the analog version, the frames are very flexible, especially in these gaps, like the bigger gaps over here on the sides. Very flexible this way as well. But this wouldn't it be the lightest HD0 bind and fly setup? It's got to be. I can't think of one coming in any lower. So another thing that was important to me that did survive, and you can kind of see on my canopy how this lip, it got bodged so much or hit so much that it's kind of flattened out, and you can see a little bit of the materials kind of come up. So this canopy actually does a pretty reasonable job of protecting the camera, as well as just the camera surviving all of my crashes. Now, I mentioned it in my analog video, but I did break off the motor screws, or not, excuse me, not the motor screws, the camera screws. Let me zoom in just a touch. If you look at the length on both sides of where the camera screw mounts in, here, see how short that is down there? Versus on the analog version where I didn't break those, you see how much longer that is? Yeah, I did break those off. I can't remember how far in I was. I would say at about a week in. And I just, of course, I lost the screws too, so I had to pull out screws from my own stock. And I just put it up against the screw mounts and just screwed the screws back in. The screws I used didn't punch through the front of the canopy. So that's something that, about as far as the damage goes, you do need to note is that I did break the little screw mounts. And there's only two of them, one in each corner. So that's our screw mount. Something else that it kind of is along that damage is I lost 3 of the antennas that it came with. So the flight that you saw on the inside flight with the new camera settings, the main indoor flight, that was with this particular antenna. I can't say it's the best antenna or the worst antenna, but what I was looking for in my stock was an antenna that is very, very similar in length and style that what it ships with. Of course, if you buy the Eco itself, it comes in with this little antenna, which doesn't have the metal shield around it, which isn't critical to the operation, but in the best case scenario for video reception, that shield does help a little bit. But do note that stock Eco, if you buy it just separately, comes with this antenna, or at least it comes with this antenna as far as how I received it. I haven't gone into checking any tunes. I actually thought the tune worked better for this heavier HD0 or Eco version. I didn't feel as quite as much of a need to change the tune. And when I was flying this one, I was also experimenting with different props. If you didn't see this video where I changed out the props and the PID tune, I don't want to go into that explanation because I'm sure this video is already long, but I'll link this video down in the video description. But one thing that we did learn from this is that with the change in just the props and a little bit of a PID tune, I got 30 more seconds of indoor flight time. So I would expect that if we made the same sort of change on this, we get a similar sort of longer flight time result. Now that flight time was not slower flight, that was my traditional inside sort of flying, but yeah, I think these props just aren't quite as efficient. But I do believe that GemFan has a lighter kind of counterpart to these HQ props available, so you could go to those as well. But I think these are just slightly heavier, and they might have a little bit more pitch versus these particular props. So if you're looking for more flight time out of your quad, two things. Buy quality batteries. I'm not saying these are the only quality batteries that are the same. Basically, all these batteries that are flat cell BT20 are all made by the same companies. You just buy them with different brands. These are the two I have. I believe Tattoos are the same. I'm hearing about other brands. I don't like to vouch for things that I haven't tried out myself. So these are the two I can vouch for. So these are the two I recommend. So one of the things that Happy Model has learned, and I don't know if I've actually suggested it or if they just watched, some micro channel or something, but longer screws are really beneficial when it comes to these double stack sort of HD whoops. It's almost critical, because if you use a shorter screw, the more traditional screw that's about half this size, you're gonna end up snapping off the posts, likely more than one in relatively short order. But when you use a longer screw, it gets down into the meat of the post, it gets down into the frame, and it just makes everything much more secure, much less likely to break. And I'm not certain how they measure screws for ordering them, but I wanted to try to give you some idea of the screw length in this particular case. So I'm going to measure it from head to point, which I don't think is how they do it. So that looks to be a 10 millimeter screw. I did suggest to Happy Model that they use a screw head that is bigger, because it will hold the canopy down better if it has a bigger flat head. Oddly enough, if you look at the analog version, they used a bigger head on these screws, but these aren't long screws. So we'll see if they actually make that change on production versions. At this time, I can't say for certain until we start to see the production versions come out, which this should be available as this video is released off the HD0 website. And then we'll see this available from resellers about 2 weeks later, which is about what we'd expect, I think, for the most part when it comes to product launches, specifically with Happy Model and HD0. But and if you're wondering, for your build purposes, getting screws like this, I've bought these screws from AliExpress, from Banggood, from eBay. I know I've gotten some from eBay as well. And I typically don't order with the smaller heads like this one. I get the bigger pan heads, I think they're called, where they're just, hopefully you can see that, maybe I get that closer, how much bigger the head is, and that will hold our canopies down. That's an important build aspect, at least it is for me. So something else that I did was I plugged it into BlueJay or esc-configurator.com, and then I pulled up the BlueJay version. As you can see here on screen, the max startup power is also maxed out, just like it was on the Mob 6 2024 edition. So these flight controllers have been configured the same. Now, it has been suggested that you can turn down the startup power and use more boost. Some people are wondering if these are settings that long-term would damage the ESC possibly. I have a hard time believing that, but anything is possible. And of course, I've been flying both of these for the better part of over 2 weeks. So if it's going to damage them, I would hope it would come within that period of time. Otherwise, it's just like anything with our micro components, that we're slightly damaging them very, very slowly, 0.001% with each particular crash, and it may take you months in order to kill one, or it could take you weeks depending upon how you fly, how you crash, and how hard you're going. So I got the scale back out here. I wanted to weigh just the Eco, so 6.53, and then their specific antenna. Let's make sure that's where zeroed out. The antenna that they have like that is 0.17, so that weight is going to be hard to beat. I have some antennas from ORT that come in around 0.5 gram, and traditionally the stock antenna comes in around 0.5 or 0.6 grams as well. So not a huge amount of weight, but when it comes to whoops, depending upon how skilled you are or how you fly, you may find that you notice the difference in these weights. So it's something to be aware of. While we're on the topic of the Eco Bundle, the camera and VTX, I took some close-up pictures. So those of you that know these components or are concerned about the layout of these components can see them, as well as the solder pads. And I do think this PCB board is a touch thinner than we've seen in other HD0 boards. But go ahead and pause if you'd like to get a longer look at those, but we're going to continue to move on. I did also suggest to Happy Model that they make the battery lead 5 millimeters longer, so that you just have a little bit more to work with. Of course, that's going to increase the weight as just a touch as well. But several people noted, that well, one of the ways that I do things, let's get one lined up here. So I shove, come on, go in there. That's the thing. This battery tray is much better as far as holding our 1S batteries than the previous frame. So I shove them in all the way down to the plastic connector, and then I plug them in. And I'm fine with that. But some people want their battery to be more centered, so they want to push them back. And as you can tell, if you push it back much more, you're going to end up putting pressure on the connector and the pins within the connector. So making this 5 millimeters longer, which isn't very much, should take care of that issue, being able to center your battery. Otherwise, I did ask them to see about getting these A30 connectors with a right angle. I believe they're getting the battery leads from G&B, and they did not say that that was an option. So we can also do that ourselves, which I did one on the analog version myself, just made it a right angle adapter. So I could actually take some length out of the battery lead this way because I have it mounted right angled. So overall, I was pretty impressed with how these things fly, both of them. You know, when we come down to the PID tune, we can get awful picky. I should make sure that everyone's aware that I have a bias for 75 millimeter whoops. I prefer them inside and outside, but I do understand why 65 is so much more popular, or I guess it can be perceived as much more popular. When we see tiny whoop races, I think they're just almost uniformly, at least the bigger races, always flying 65 millimeter, 31 millimeter props. As well as, I think when you go down to the smaller prop size, it produces less thrust, and therefore it makes it easier for most to fly inside. It does take some time and some effort and some, you know, practice in order to get inside flying down. So if you're new to FPV or you haven't flown inside before and maybe you're wondering, it takes time. Some people pick it up very, very quickly. I've been flying since 2015, and I've been flying inside probably since within a year of that 2015 date. And so I've slowly progressed over time. You can watch other people have been flying nearly as long and are doing crazy amount of tricks, like Mo FPV. I don't think he has a review on the Eco, but he has a review on the Mob 6 2024. Heads over at Infinity Loops. He does a lot of in-store freestyle trick sort of stuff, and he hasn't been flying as long. So there's a big variance to that, but I don't want people to come out of the gate thinking that you're going to be able to do some of the things you're going to see on YouTube right away. Just get comfortable and enjoy all the flights. I know that's a little bit of an aside to this. I just get a lot of questions from people about trying to make these things better right out of the gate, and I think that comes from a place of innocence where they just haven't spent enough time flying. They see a video and they want it to fly for them just like that, and that's really down to us. I also have a short on how to train yourself from angle mode, which is self-stabilized, into acro mode, and I'll put that down in the video description, as well as links to the HD0 website where this will first launch from, as well as the Eco. We didn't go deep dive into the Eco because I think we've kind of shown it, right? Showed you all the camera settings, showed you inside, outside. We took a look at the weight, the hardware. You got a chance to look at up close and personal of the hardware on both sides if that's of a particular draw for you. But if there's more I need to investigate with the Eco, please let me know. I'll probably put this into an outdoor build. Run this off the 5-volt rail, the 5-volt rail off of, maybe I'll put it in one of my favorite Rocket Race, a little 2-inch 2S. Those are awful fun. It'd be nice to have a nice light HD0 version. And because this board is so thin, I think I could mount it down lower and maybe keep it below the prop line on that particular tight quad. So if you have any questions about the HD0 Eco, which I think is what it's called, HD0 Eco Bundle, probably, as well as the Mobula 6 Eco 2024 edition, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching. Heads over at Entity